Hello, everyone, and welcome to this latest live episode of VOX VOMITUS. I'm your host, Jennifer Ann Gordon, the author of the hotel series, Pretty Ugly and the Japanese Box and Other Stories. Joining me today, as always, is my VOX VOMITUS vixen, Allison Martine, author of The Bourbon Books, which includes Dibs Since September, Move on Melinda, Climb the Salmon Ladder, and The Ranchers Take Manhattan, which is her newest release.
I make you work for it now.
I know. I was like,
you don't have to list all anymore.
the...
Seriously, I'm like, you can just say the Bourbon Books.
Bourbon Books, which includes, yeah. But it's I like to do it to, and this will come in handy during the show later, work on my asthma. It works on my lungs. And people who are like, what? That's a weird segue. It'll make sense later. Joining us today is one of our favorite VOX VOMITUS guests, New York Times bestselling author Carol Goodman, author of all of my favorite books, including her latest release, The Return to Wyldcliffe Heights. Carol.
Hello, Jennifer. And
welcome.
Thank you for having me here. As I've said to you off camera, I wrote the book for you. This is obvious.
I felt it.
My ideal readers.
You know, what I loved is Allison started it before I did. And I always love it when she's texting me, have you started yet? Have you started yet?
I'm kind of annoying that way. I'm like, have you?
You're going to love it.
Talk to her about it.
And I'm like, I'm trying to finish a book right now.
Unacceptable. Get on.
Unacceptable.
Well, and I usually start before she does, but she often finishes really close to me because I'm almost whenever I can. And so I don't have a book to hold up because I listen to it on Audible, and it was so good. And because of that, I might take longer because it's, however fast the person talks. I only speed it up if it's really, really slow because I don't like doing that. But Jennifer reads really fast. So she'll be like, zip past me. I'm like, hold on, don't spoil. I haven't gotten there.
I know. It's like I started it, I feel like on a Sunday or something. And then Monday night, I was like, finished. And Allison's like, what? But Carol, talk to us a little bit. First of all, tell our audience who might not be familiar with you a little bit about yourself, and then a little bit about Return to Wyldcliffe Heights, which, yes, it is like the book of my soul.
I feel like every time we say this, so people who are listening to this and are not looking at our ridiculousness, I want to spell out Wyldcliffe every time I see it because it's with a Y and there's 2 F's and an E and all this.
Every time I write it, I have to remember where that E is. Does it come at the end? It's a little bit based on a neighboring town called Rhinecliff, and Rhinecliff has the
E's in the middle.
And no.
That's confusing then because it could be there.
Yes.
Wild with an E, because like Oscar Wilde, but no, his is with an I and then an E. So this is, I don't.
So sorry about that.
Don't spell it the way it should be, and then there you go. But I tagged it in the comments, like Return to Wyldcliffe Heights, so people will see that. Hopefully, that'll help.
Good. I hope everyone can find it. So what did you ask me to do? Talk about
talk about yourself. Talk about yourself. A fun fact, like we are in like a writers group.
A lover of the goth. This is really the place where I decided just to go full out goth, write my love letter to Jane Eyre. And Jane Eyre is the book that probably is the most influential book in my. I read it when I was 13. Between Jane Eyre, which is the very literary why I'm, love the goth, but then there's also Dark Shadows, the supernatural soap opera that I was obsessed with.
I loved Dark Shadows. I read the comic books later on. I watched Dark Shadows in the 90s on Nick at Night when they played the reruns.
That's right.
Nick at Night, yes.
Nick at Night.
I love it. Well, and this was like all the kinds of goth because it has that kind of goth. And then whenever I was trying to describe this in comments, I'm like multi-era because it has like the layers of this story from the houses and the people on this stuff. Right. And then one of it takes place in kind of the goth grunge 90s. So you have that era too, where it's like, how much eyeliner can we put on? I felt like I probably should have done that, but then I would just look like a raccoon. So
I can't use eyeliner myself. Yeah, so
I'm wearing a darker red lip today.
Yeah, I put a little lipstick on.
This is not for me.
This is as goth as it gets for me. I'm wearing sort of a medieval scarf. That's really as goth as I get.
You've got it going on.
Yeah.
Like, I created this world.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, so I'm very, my books, I think, have generally been kind of goth inflected, but this was the one where I just decided to go full out. And also set in the Hudson Valley, which, I live in the Hudson Valley. I started setting books here even before I lived here. My first book, The Lake of Dead Languages, is set on what I consider the very northern part. Thank you. The very northern part of the Hudson Valley, actually the Adirondacks, because I just love this area. And this book really came out of, there were some old houses I visited, including one that was the warden's house on the grounds of a women's prison. And that really inspired the very back plot of this book. And, other buildings that and a hotel in New York City, the Jane Hotel, which becomes the Josephine in Return to Wyldcliffe Heights.
So Carol, because part of this is set in the 90s punk and goth scene, which I absolutely love, and that's like who I was as a teenager. What was your, connection with 90s alt rock?
By the 90s, I was a young mother living in Texas. So
you were like, what I should have been doing? Wearing black lipstick and going to a mosh pit.
Although I went to college I graduated college in 1981, and it was, we were like listening to Talking Heads and Clash, and so I was there at the beginning. When I lived in New York in the 80s, I went to the Jane Hotel, which was a venue for punk bands in the 80s and 90s. So I had like little glimmers of it. When I decided on the chronology of the book, I realized, okay, these people were the older woman in the book, the writer that is telling her story to young Agnes, my young character. I realized, okay, she would have been, she was young in the 90s. So I had to do my research.
Research to the 90s, that just hurts my head.
I always want to set things in the 90s because I'm like, oh, it's easy. That was when I was a teenager.
That's what I think things still are now.
Yes,
exactly.
I know it's disconcerting. I recently was in conversation with a writer I love, Sarah Stewart Taylor, and her historical novel. I've got her book here. Her historical novel, Agony Hill, which is really fantastic, is set in 1965. And so that, truly is a historic novel. But I said, it's a little disconcerting to have a book be called a historic novel that you were alive.
Exactly.
Yes. We've had a lot of authors come on and they're just like, and then when my agent or my editor said this is historical fiction, I had to fight them because I was like, no, this is about when I was a teenager.
That's ancient history. And they're like, how dare?
So I really did. I love the whole aesthetic of 90s goth, obviously. And it's just another part of that goth is always with us, that there's always going to be an iteration of it somewhere. And I was able to go to, this hotel, the Jane, which is in the book, it's called the Josephine. When I was in the 80s, there were punk bands there. Hedwig and the Angry Itch was performed there. I later wandered into that hotel and it was a SRO. RuPaul lived there in the Tower Room.
I love it.
I love that.
It's an amazing place. Yeah. And so when I went to visit it I actually went in the 80s, the 90s. And it was an SRO hotel, so, like a welfare hotel. They had, it's got this gorgeous lobby, but in the 90s, it had a plexiglass barrier around the ornate front desk.
Do not touch.
Also, New York in the 90s was like before Disney took over Times Square.
Yeah. Oh, and these were the, you're aware, it's near the... on Jane Street, it's near the meatpacking district, and that was when meat was hanging.
It had a very specific smell to that neighborhood.
Yeah, we don't really want that on our furniture. If we think about it. This is historic.
But I did go back and stay at the hotel when in just a couple years ago and to do research on it, and it still very much had that vibe and felt very haunted by those times.
I love that you have like not one, but two amazing historical buildings. And I think it's kind of common for a lot of things that are that kind of goth feel. They have this one building that has this own soul, but you managed to pull two into this that had their own spirits, their own backstories, their own histories
that were still so connected.
Yes. And
on multiple levels. Like
that just blew my mind. And I thought that was so well done. And I kind of want like maps, diagrams, timelines. None of these are on audio, and even if they were, you can't do anything. Like I started listening to a book that had a cast of characters, and it's just the guy reading so and so from here, so and so. Like it doesn't work.
I'd be like, I can't. I'll never remember that.
No, kind of need the physical. And I don't have.
I wanted like a family tree as well. Family tree blueprints.
And this is a kind way, I think, of saying it's a little bit complicated. But
I was never confused.
Me neither. No,
it is a rich web. And what I was going to say actually is, do you have like one of those like serial killer walls when you're writing where it's like yarn, where there's strings attached, like so and so is this person's?
What I have. This is for the book I'm revising now. I just have like 1,000 Post-it notes.
Oh, stickies everywhere.
That is a lot of stickies.
I like it.
Not in the least bit really organized. You know, it's I like when I start putting sticky notes on sticky notes, I realize that maybe I've got to. Like,
it's like sticky note inception at that point, and you're like, this has gotten too deep. We gotta layer them.
When it looks like a flip book.
Or when you get up from your desk and you realize they're just stuck to your scarf.
It's stuck all over me. Yeah.
I needed that because it's coming with me now. But yeah, I was never confused at all. And I'm gonna go back to something Jennifer said before we were even live, is that you got these multiple generations, and the young writer is young enough that she is another generation behind the person who is one of the main storytellers in this. And then when we realized that she is literally our age and is the old person, I was just like,
the old lady.
Getting into Jennifer's asthma, the reason she is older is she was the victim in this fire. She's lost her sight and she's asthmatic, so she has this old voice. Narrator nailed the old voice. I cannot imagine having to do that for hours on end. So kudos to your narrator, who probably now is like, great, I've got vocal nodes, because he had a gravel voice the whole time.
For having done that, right?
But yeah, that was the only part that was, I wouldn't say confusing, but I had to do like the mental shift of she is not a little old woman. She's me.
I know. My original like visualization of her was like paper thin skin.
Jennifer,
which she does have. I have that too. And I was like, oh, that poor old lady. And then when it did a flashback to like her in like 1994 or whatever, and I'm like, oh, she's my age.
Technically, to throw my biological sister under the bus, that's more appropriately her age, because she's a couple years older than me. All those people, they're like, yeah, if you are late to this right now, it's time for your colonoscopy, all of that kind of stuff. But because we're even more,
I just want to point out that she is younger than me. I think at some point I wanted her to be older, but it just didn't. I wanted her also to be young in the 90s. So I she has.
You're like, I either have to set this in the future.
Yeah, you could have done that. You're like, so Agnes comes over in her hover car.
In her hover car. The year is 2048.
Yes, exactly.
Hey, I have written a book in the future, so it's not impossible. But I just
how far in the future?
The disinvited guest is about 20 years.
Yes, it is.
Like a future.
I don't remember that being in the future, because again, it wasn't like.
It wasn't the Jetsons.
No, I did want to write. Actually, I had an idea for a sci-fi futuristic book that I wanted to write with my daughter, but she refused.
She refused.
I volunteer as tribute. I would write.
I was going to say,
I'm not your daughter, but I can fill in.
You can have two surrogate daughters right here. I'll write with you, Carol. We'll go to 90s goth clubs with you.
I love that you had that choice and you committed to it. And then beyond that you had the other generations before it. So we had all these layers of women generations of women interacting. And I loved that so much.
Generations, and even a sort of older history because the house is based on that it was at one point had been a psychiatric, it had been a women's prison, and then it had become a psychiatric facility. So yes, it's many layers, which, you know, my fear could get confusing. But it is part of the Gothic aesthetic, I think, to have that kind of layered the past.
Yeah, the past is still haunting the present. It's
Yeah,
like, you know, the past is never dead. It's, you know,
Where
I'm
it
such a
says,
sucker for that.
well, it says on your book, the past can be rewritten, which I
Correct.
love. And so we were talking about, like, so the whole kind of premise of this book is a book within a book. So you already had me at the whole, this is set in a literary house and she's working for a publisher and oh, what's going on? And so she's there working for the publisher that put out like her best favorite book growing up, like the book that was spoke to her and was like a book her mother gave her and all this stuff. And then it's like, we want a sequel. So I'm just trying to think of what book that came out 20, 30 years ago is someone suddenly like, we need a sequel for it now. And
Well, I feel like it would be like as if Flowers in the Attic had never gotten multiple
that was already
sequels.
Right.
Yeah,
That it does have that aesthetic, the flowers in the attic.
Flower. Oh yeah, because that was the book of the late 80s and early 90s
Right.
that all of us teenagers were reading obsessively.
Right, but my brain went to, was it To Kill a Mockingbird that got a much later, like
Much
here's another book,
Much,
and everybody's
much
like,
later.
we should not have done this.
Yeah.
It's a bad idea. So that's where my mind went to, like,
Yeah.
maybe the standalone thing should just stand alone. If it was,
It was, you know, to
okay.
try to think of and of course I was also thinking anachronistically of like the 60s goth. You know, the goth romances, the Gothic romances, you know, with the woman,
The women running from houses.
running from the
Yes,
house
she's
with
her-
the, you know, clutching her, you know, flimsy negligee. With a
I know she's always in those like high heel slippers that have marabou on them,
Right.
and her hair is epic.
Jennifer, you've done a whole photo shoot of that. I've seen
I
it.
have done a whole photo shoot of that. And in my book, Pretty Ugly, I made my main character an Instagram influencer who did makeup looks based on those book covers.
on those covers. I adore those. So yeah, I was thinking about like the Phyllis Whitney books and the you know, all the heirs of Rebecca, which are in Jane Eyre. So I basically stretched that a little bit by having a book in the early 90s be that kind of book. But my basis for my sort of excuse for it was Flowers in the Attic. And thinking, and that was a book that was I think a little past my time, but it was just all over the place, you know, and like
couldn't miss it.
reading that. And so that's
me not allowed to read it.
Yeah, you weren't allowed to read it.
No, my mother was not. She's like, no, that is garbage. You're not allowed to read
Because your
that.
mother was a librarian,
My
so
mom was
she
a
actually
librarian.
knew what it was.
Well, and at the time she wasn't. This is before she was a librarian, but this is also the woman who was mad that I was reading Anne Rice and was like, Anne Rice wears dirty underwear. That is a direct quote from my mother. And then
how did she know?
Well, like that was the thing. Like it didn't occur to me till later to be like, Mom, why do you know so much about it? And like my aunts later, the ones who are like her college friends that I call aunts are like, oh, your mom read all that stuff. And she loved her some of that, which is why she's like, you weren't allowed to read it. But the joke always was, then she gave me The World According to Garp, forgetting what happens in The World According to Garp. And that scarred me way more than any Anne Rice could, because I knew that was fiction. I'm like, vampires aren't real, but the stuff that happens in World According to Garp could totally happen. But yeah, okay. So you mentioned Flowers in the Attic, and I want to say, like, attic. This whole book has so much attic going on that it's like, what is it about attics that just shit goes down?
Shit goes down in the attics. I feel like there's like some really great Gothic tropes that we all lovers of Gothic fiction love. It's
Bad woman in the attic.
Bad woman in the attic, drownings for days. Sometimes the mad woman in the attic drowns. Fires.
You know, fires let you get away with a lot of stuff if you burn the bodies beyond recognition and burn all the evidence about how that thing started. Oops.
Yep. Oops. Yeah, they are dramatic, and of course go back to Jane Eyre and Rebecca.
And Rebecca.
And the house, I read this great book years ago called The Poetics of Space by Gaston Bachelard. So like a French metaphysics dude. So very heady, but it was also very much like how the house symbolizes our psyche. So if something, you know, the attic are, you know, is our subconscious, you know, and the base, you know, so you looking at the house as the places in the house as parts of ourselves and parts of our history. So
what cracks me up about that is my 8-year-old is currently obsessed with, well, he has been for a couple years now, liminal spaces. And he's suddenly really big on basements. We live in Southern California. There are no basements. And he's like finding pictures online and he wants to move into a house with a basement. I have to keep reminding him.
It's like, no, he doesn't.
No, he doesn't. I know he's
nothing around here is a basement. But he's saying, he has no idea, but it's just the concept. And so he keeps finding pictures online.
Just tell him basements are just water damage and spiders.
I know. They're not. But
and mold.
And he thinks it's going to like take him to someplace. Like basements are Narnia to him, and he's seen Narnia, and he's like Turkish Delight. I'm like, you don't want that either. So I mean, it's just the concept. So I'm glad he hasn't found out what an attic is yet, because I'll be screwed.
Yes, I can remember having that. I grew up in a suburb of Philadelphia in a prefab development that was like on a grid plan. Houses built in the early '60s, and I wanted to be able to get lost. That was the thing. Like I remember going out for a walk and trying to get lost, and you can't.
You're like, damn it, I'm home again.
It wasn't until we moved to New York, into a town that had older houses, that I felt like I could really kind of live out this fantasy of, and I got lost. And
was it everything you hoped it would be?
It kind of was. I was kind of excited. I was, and then I was a little freaked out. But yeah, so having that, growing up with these ideas of, and of course watching Dark Shadows, where they would have the moody old house and the music and the waves. So my house in here is not on the ocean, but it is on the Hudson River, and it is on a cliff above the Hudson River. So
do you have attics or basements?
Neither of which I ever go into. It's like the attic. I mean, the attic actually is now sealed off because we had bats a few years ago. And
I have refused. I peeked in the attic like the day we moved in, and immediately was like, I'm never going in there, and moved a table in front of the attic door. And I've never been in there since.
Yeah, well, you had an encounter with a bat recently too, like a couple years ago maybe. But you had,
that wasn't here, but I'm sure there's bats in our attic, and I'm never opening it.
Well, I found there was a bat in my house once, and I totally freaked out. So none of the it's a bat. It's like Barnabas Collins and Dark Shadows. It was like, oh my God,
I know that could be my secret. My secret vampire boyfriend is here. No, it's like rabies. Well,
and I love all the pictures of like little fruit bats. They're so cute, little flying boys.
They are cute until you turn around and you hear a flapping. Near your head.
No, not good. So yes, I do go occasionally. Have to go down in the basement, and it's never a happy moment for me. So I'm not inclined towards
like, how about no. Okay, Carol, you introduced a word to me in your book that I had never heard before, and I think is the fanciest, Frenchiest word. Amanuensis?
Oh, amanuensis.
Amanuensis. I definitely was saying it wrong in my head.
And you agree with me, like, yeah, that sounds right. But I was just like, I've never heard of this word. Are you making this word up? It's kind of like a chanteuse, which I don't know what that is either. The word chartreuse is a color, but I don't think it's the color I think it is in my head, because chartreuse is like I don't know. It's
lime green, but
lime green.
It's in my head. It should be like
cherry fuchsia.
I don't know.
I'm like
amanuensis, which it's actually like a Latin word. I think it has something to do with hand, because manual. So it's the person who takes down a book. So Henry James had an amanuensis because
it's the fancy word for scribe, and I'd never heard it before, and I loved it. And I'm like, but because I'm hearing it, I couldn't see it to be like, let me go write this down, because I probably wouldn't even get the first letter right. I'm like, is it an E? Is it an I? And then you're like, the man, so maybe it's an M, like an A. EMA. You're gonna have to write it down and send it to me later. I'm gonna make a shirt that says that, because I love that.
Put it in.
Well,
we do it.
Well, I used to work after I had kids. I worked as a dictator. No, that's not right. A dictator. Like
Allison, don't say that on Vox Vomitus. You were a dictator.
I was a transcriptionist. I first done it through.
You were an amanuensis.
Yeah, but I was because I was doing it for a couple different things. And one time I was literally helping a woman first on one project and then another, but she was getting her doctoral thesis, and she was doing all these. She was part of the Catholic Church, like as she worked for a private Catholic school, and she had all these interviews of her with all these priests, and it was fascinating. But I had to figure out what they were saying half the time and doing that, and then putting it into logical sentences because sometimes it didn't quite work out. So apparently I was one and I didn't even know it.
There you go. There you go.
I know. Now I'm thinking, like, when I worked for the political lobbyist, my job was literally, I was just doing that too.
Put it on your resume.
That's so much better than
what is this?
Girl Friday.
Yeah, but they're gonna be like, is this something sexual? And we're like, no. I want it to be. Would I get better if it would be?
No, not with the priest, certainly.
No,
with the political. So.
I know, not with the priests or the politicians.
Well, there we go.
None of that.
Yeah, but I love that was an aspect of the thing, because she is then tasked with getting this woman's story down, because she is like, I'm going to write the sequel to Kill a Mockingbird that nobody really wanted, but apparently everybody really wanted. But then she's actually got to make sure she gets the story right and not just streamline a stream of conscious. And then I love how she's like, I wrote this sentence, should I have written it? I loved that feeling. I was like,
yeah, she adds a little bit at the end, which when she's transcribing it or typing it up, she has to one of the rules that Veronica St. Clair, the author, has stated is that it has to be, she takes it down by hand, and then Agnes has to type it up at night. She's not allowed to use a laptop. She won't have, she's not allowed to go on social media. There's no internet connection. Of course, Agnes.
Talk about her or the house.
Or the house.
Or the house.
Or the house. So, but of course she, sneaks away to the town. And
I was going to say, there's no way in hell that a 20-something-year-old woman is going to be off social media.
Well, I do like that she was established as she didn't have a smartphone, and she didn't have any of these things. So it was actually her publisher who was enabling her to have these things. So I did love like this silly laptop subterfuge is like, can't be seen with this box. And then like 5 minutes later, so I heard you got a laptop. Somebody else spots her. Like, I can't get away with anything in this town.
Just little
lasted like half a page.
Exactly. Yeah. So she's a little, Agnes is somebody who's grown up in the in like foster care and social services. So she's, she doesn't have all the things that other people her age do.
Like Atticus.
Yes, exactly. And so a lot of, I worked in publishing when I was, I think when I first thought of this book, I really wanted it to be set, and I worked in publishing in the 80s. I wanted it.
You wanted to have it then.
Yeah.
I can see that. Yeah.
That's not something I think that people necessarily want from me. So
well, I would want it, but it would make it really hard for the generation before to have then been set in the 90s, because then you've got time travel.
Yes. And,
it would have to be like in the 80s new wave scene, and then in the 60s before that.
60s,
it would have thrown off the whole timeline.
It would have been really difficult.
But I did want to have that sense of like, so I wanted it actually, that contrast between modern and so we're in the modern times. But she's living in this old house, and she's in this little town in the Hudson Valley. And that's how it feels sometimes in the Hudson Valley, that
and all of her time actually in the house in Wyldcliffe Heights, it never feels like it's 2023, 2024.
No,
it very much feels, it's timeless.
It's so timeless, including having a woman be like, take off your shoes. I'll bring you your supper. It's like, no one does that now. What is happening?
I know, like food in a basket left outside your door. I want that right now.
No, would someone please bring me my lunch in a basket? I was really fortunate a number of years ago, quite a few years ago now, to have gone to a writer's retreat in Scotland at a castle. It's called the Hawthornden. And they would bring you your lunch in one of those Fortnum and Mason baskets. It was the best month of my life.
I was going to say, and you've been spoiled by it to this day. You're like, I'll never get that again.
Actually, the most exotic and just spoiling thing about it was that they did my wash every week, and I was like reduced to tears. Like, no one has done my wash since I was like 12 years old.
I was just thinking that. I was like, what? What is that like?
I know it was quite amazing.
And I was even somebody who moved back home at various points post divorces and things like that. And I still did all my own laundry when I was back. And then, I've been doing laundry for 5 people for, it's constant.
That's why that was the most incredible. And they had in that in Hawthorne Inn, they had like an old like one of those big English stoves. I think they're called an aga. And they would hang the clothes, like they had drying racks. You sometimes
above the stove?
Yeah, above the stove. So you'd
it smell like your
well, you'd see your knickers,
Knickers
hanging in the
not who those are.
like right above a thing of stew.
I know, that's the thing. Like, wouldn't the spices and smells like
why do my underpants smell like chicken pot pie?
It's probably nice if they're making
fine. I totally would have
snickerdoodles
gone for that. So so these little experiences, and then I also in my 20s, I worked at Yaddo, the artist colony. I was the secretary at Yaddo, and that also big mansion. So
were you the amanuensis?
I was not even. I was the receptionist. Oh, okay. I answered the telephone. So but it gave me that sort of feeling for what these places would have felt like to be.
Do you remember the first old building that you fell in love with? Like, at what point in your life did you walk into a building and all of a sudden inspiration hit?
Oh my gosh. I mean, honestly, walk into, I'm trying to remember, because I'm thinking, actually, I was watching Dark Shadows, where that Collinwood is probably the first old building I felt. I think really, I must have gone in like house tours, but I think it was really being in college where I got to sort of live in old buildings. And
were you living in a dorm that was old style?
Yes.
Okay.
Very cool.
See, I had a very different college experience because I went to UCSD, John Muir College, where our buildings were literally like the 10-story cement things. Like, yes, this is modern or something. And look, I can't complain because my room faced the courtyard, but the other side, so like our study area, faced the Pacific. So there's no complaint there, but it wasn't an old building by any means.
And I think by the time I went to college, actually, I went to a summer camp at a boarding school. I wanted to go to boarding school. I used to beg my mother.
I used to beg my mom.
Like my
mom's like, we're poor.
Right. And my mother believed that boarding schools were, she says, that's where, people send their kids who are in trouble.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, what do I have to do? I know, get lost in this neighborhood.
It didn't work. Try again.
Getting lost. We have to send her to boarding school.
I know. We can't keep track of her. She's 2 blocks away, lost in front of somebody's house.
But there were even shows in the 90s when I was a kid that featured like boarding schools, and it just seemed like you basically are living at summer camp. And I loved going to summer camp, so I thought that would be great. And
it was always like summer camp, but in like a really beautiful building that had like turrets and beautiful hardwood stairs.
That was not my summer camp.
No, but I mean, but that's what like in my brain, that's what boarding school is.
Old and fancy.
Probably older than you two. But I did one summer when I was 14, I think it was. 14. Went to a boarding school for summer. Northfield Mount Herman, which no longer exists. And that had beautiful old buildings. Although my dorm was completely modern and it had been donated by the people who owned Reader's Digest. There was like this big...
What would a building donated by Reader's Digest look like? My brain goes...
I feel like it's a smaller version.
Smaller
version of something that could be really beautiful.
On it, like, the college life or whatever, all the ones with like the all the different little things. So that's usually all I ever read in those were those silly little anecdotes people threw in. Now they just put them on Twitter, but the little stories people would contribute, all in a day's work.
Oh, I actually do think I know those. Yeah, no, they just had I guess it was the founder of Reader's Digest. But it's a good question. I wish to remember like what old building I first walked into. Maybe even churches.
Yeah.
I didn't go to church. I wasn't raised going to church, but we'd be in New York City and we go to St. Patrick's very early. I started getting, for someone who grew up in a split level development in Pennsylvania, and have never lived in the Victorian house. I've never.
I think sometimes those of us like that, because Carol, my experience was the same. I grew up in California. We didn't have anything called history here that connected to buildings. Like, no, everything here was just like a ranch and empty, and maybe some literally just orange fields down the road. We didn't have those kind of things. We didn't have those kind of houses, but my family's from Pennsylvania. So when I'd go back to those houses, they would freak me out because there would be basements and there'd be like deer heads in them and freaking things out. And older buildings. Even like I did grow up going to church. The church that I grew up in, I think, was built in 1965. I don't think it was. I mean, I could trace back the church's history from when it was on another street, and then those buildings all got destroyed because they weren't built that well. So it wasn't like we want to save this for posterity. Like, no, someone breathed too hard and it fell over during one of the hymns. So
I feel like where I went to first and second grade was I know it was like a really big old brick building. It was Mount
School then?
Yeah, Mount St. Mary's, and it was like had tunnels and weird rooms. And one of the classrooms you had to go through like a trap door.
What?
And like climb up a ladder. But I never made it to that grade because the school closed down.
There's a reason that school closed down.
Exactly. I'm like, this is a death trap.
Yes,
a literal death trap. I mean, and like there would be Easter egg hunts, and they would just let the kids run wild in the building. Like,
did all the kids come back?
A couple kids, yeah,
probably.
Jennifer, have you used school in any of your books?
I don't have a school in any of my books yet.
I feel like some of your stuff referenced. I want to say that there were times in Pretty Ugly that you may have referenced some of your school stuff.
There is
really not direct.
Yeah, there are school things that will be happening in my current work in progress.
Oh yeah, that would make sense based on what you told me. But I do feel like Dark Academia would be something you could completely.
I love Dark Academia, and this is the reason why I fell in love with Carol Goodman's books, because I read The Lake of Dead Languages,
and that's Dark
when it came out, which was Carol's first book.
I don't think anyone used the word phrase Dark Academia.
You were in a genre that didn't exist yet. You were a trailblazer.
But I think, I think the real trailblazer there
was Secret History,
which I was influenced by. So I think Secret History really doesn't start Dark Academia, because you can look back and find those kind of books, further back. But it wasn't called that.
No, it wasn't. And I remember, I fully admit, I was obsessed with Secret History. And when I read Lake of Dead Languages, I think it was because I was searching like books like the Secret History. Like, I want the.
Yeah. And we didn't have an algorithm on Amazon yet to tell us that. If you like
if you like this, buy this.
Yeah.
But I recently just did another Sorry.
Yes, you have to go talk to a librarian who would say, you like this book, here's this other book.
Yeah, you would show them, this is what I have. What else you got? And they were like, your dealer, and they would be like, here you go, I got you. So is that how you found it, Jen? How did you figure out what you needed?
Honestly, it was, I think, or like really Goodreads had started at that time, but really early.
Ancient Goodreads.
It was because I remember joining Goodreads pretty early in my career. I remember being so proud. I went to a meeting with a very young, a young editor when I started doing young adult fiction. My young adult fiction editor was quite young, and a young marketing person. And I was like, they were going to talk to me about social media. And I said, I really like Goodreads. And they were like, oh yeah, we're finding that's already passé. And I was like, what?
No.
It has,
it comes and goes. There are people who are pushing for other things now, but I feel like it's here, I hope to say, because I've got all my memories saved on that. It's not up here.
Yeah. Well, no, I very religiously put, all the books I read on Goodreads so that I can remember what I've read, which very often.
I always should do this.
You really should.
I know, because I read 100 books a year, and I'm like,
Jennifer,
what did I read?
All you have to do is go onto Goodreads, find me. That's most of what you read, and then just pull off the ones that I read on my own and add in the ones you read on your own. And at least 80% the same.
Much hipper than me, just got me to start Storyverse.
Storygraph.
No, Storyverse.
There's another one?
I think so.
Oh, great.
I I can't keep up.
I haven't even, and I'm barely on Storygraph, and I've heard, and I didn't really find it.
Maybe mean to go on Storygraph. Maybe I went on the wrong one.
Maybe you have a new one.
It could be.
But Jennifer, you were going to say something earlier, and I was throwing in the librarian comment. So I
I was just going to say, I recently did a reread, but I did a re-listen. I listened to Lake of Dead Languages, and I had read it with my eyeballs when it came out 20 years ago.
It's
not yet.
20 years, 2001. Yeah, it's 2002. It's 12 years now.
Put it on my TBR.
Wow. So yeah, I did the audiobook this last time because I wanted my husband Roman to hear it because he loves your work and he loved it too. And I think we had just also done Secret History and then leapt into
I love it. I'm happy to have them pair. I actually, and I don't normally share like fan letters, but I did get this letter recently. I don't get that many, but I got one recently from a 14-year-old girl who was just, I just read Lake of Dead Languages, and she was like, oh, and I was excited when this happened. And I was excited. I mean, it was such a wonderful letter. And then she said at the end of it, she said, we found the copy. My aunt and I were going through my grandma's garage, and we found my aunt's old copy in a box. And that's how I came to read it. And I thought, oh my God, I am Jumanji.
Jumanji, I love it.
I am the book you find in your grandmother's attic, right? But it was it was not the grandmother's book. It was the aunt's book.
Yeah.
Which should make it feel a little bit better, but also probably book still is cursed. I mean, anything you never really know.
Yeah, exactly.
Did she start hearing drums and were there elephants? Because I feel like that's not appropriate for
that's
language.
Not part of Lake of Dead Languages.
But suddenly it is. That would be
it could be.
That's the plot twist. It's like,
that's the sequel, Carol. That's the sequel.
The Jumanji sequel. So
I'll read that too.
Yeah, Lake of Dead Languages 2. Jumanji style.
And they made sequels of those, and like my kids, I don't even think they saw the original, which I'm like, okay, but they don't have the interest for that. They've seen the newer ones where it's a video game and it has The Rock.
I didn't even know that existed.
Like that's not a thing. No, it is, and they're actually pretty good movies. So I would love to make fun of them, but I can't because they were fun. And anything my kids will sit through.
Jumanji is what she's talking about.
Jumanji, but I
love Jumanji.
Yeah, the original that was a board game, but the newer version it's a video game, and they get uploaded.
I see.
It's cute. It's fun. But yeah, I don't think that would belong in yours. What would be yours if it came to life? With Dark Academia, what happens in Dark Academia? What would you hear?
What would you hear? Oh, well, people doing a play in a different language.
You'd hear like,
yeah.
You say,
oh, I said you'd hear people doing a like an ancient play. Like it would be like, like
Latin.
People are speaking in Latin.
Yeah, Latin.
There's poetry being whispered.
Probably. Perhaps some like foghorns in the distance.
Yeah, some distant splashing.
Or actually Lake of Dead Languages has the lake freezes and the lake makes all these.
Oh yeah, the ice sings.
Right.
The ice okay, that's creepy.
Well, when I was writing Lake of Dead Languages, I was going up a lot to Mohonk, talk about beautiful Mohonk House, which is this beautiful hotel. So much I can't, it is now so expensive. I can't possibly, normal people can't possibly go to it. But years and years ago, we used to go as a splurge. It was still expensive. But there was a naturalist who did hikes around the lake. And she was the first one who told me like, oh, when the lake freezes, it makes these noises. It makes these like moans and, all these eerie sounds. And that's, I think, that was one of my inspirations for Lake of Dead Languages. But so that sound, that's what you would hear.
If you hear that in your garage, Jumanji.
That's what basements sound like too.
I'll tell my child that. He'll be like, listen to this, Mom.
So Carol, what are you working on now? You showed us your Post-its on top of Post-its.
Yes, that's probably her.
So it's a book set in Greece. It's right now set. So a little, I went a little after I wrote this, I was kind of like, okay, you really went into the Hudson Valley here, which I love, and I'll always come back to the Hudson Valley. But I thought I'd been traveling. My husband's a poet, and we've traveled to Greece, where he has his book's been translated, and he has poet friends there. So I decided, and I was a classics major, so I thought, oh, I'm going to write something on an island in Greece. So right now,
Which island?
a made-up island.
Okay, perfect.
So what that means, Jennifer, is we have to visit all of them to get the feel, because there is no just go to that one.
I think I'm spending 2 weeks on a Greek island next summer at a writing retreat. That's why I'm like, what island?
Oh, you please tell me please give me information about that.
I will. Yes.
And I've got a book for you to read there then, because it's
exactly. I know. Like perfect.
It is set at a writing retreat on a Greek island, and it has It's
you are a time traveler. You went to Jennifer's retreat that hasn't happened yet.
I've already went to the retreat. Did I write something good there, or did I get involved in some shady business?
Like old gifts that the gods give you, it comes with a curse. So,
of course,
yeah.
I just know you said set in Greece, and I got hungry. I'm like, so tell me about the food. I'm going, that's really not
a lot of feta and olives, and there's even a point where they light the saganaki cheese, and they so
that goes on fire.
Yeah, I love Greek food, and fortunately, we now have a good Greek restaurant in the neighborhood, so that as I was writing it, I would go out and get more
for research.
Preparation. I think that's valid. You're like, you know what? I'm stuck on this scene. I do think I need some Kopenisti right now. Thank you.
That's exactly what I did. So yeah, right now it's called The Goddess of Discord, but I do not think that title is going to.
I like it, but the problem is nowadays people are like, on my Discord or my Slack, we were talking about this, blah, 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 because you forget Discord is now one other social site. That's
it's not the word Discord that they objected to. It was goddess. I was told that it was too romanticy.
I was wondering, I was going to say, is it to a game of whatever? I can't even say any of that.
I had not
a Court of Thorn and Roses.
I had not known what the word romanticy was when they told me that it was.
Well, we can school you on that, but honestly, the Goddess of Discord doesn't fit the pattern, because those are always a something of something and something, or a something so something and something. So yours doesn't fit because it's not a Goddess of Discord and Slack, because then that would definitely be social media.
That would definitely.
If it would fit the pattern, but if it was like a goddess so discordant and shiny, I got nothing.
Yeah. So we'll see. I'll try to explain that.
A goddess of pita and feta.
A goddess of pita and feta.
I need that book.
That's what I'm going to be known as next summer.
Yes. It's like, hey, it's that girl. She's
the goddess of, but I can't do the pita. So I guess it would have to be.
What are you gonna do?
Sambuca and
No.
Just or grape leaves if you can't have.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, so there are many options. So.
Well, I'm excited for whatever the book is called, and that'll probably be out next summer, because you're usually in July.
I've been a summer girl lately, so it'll probably be next July or August. Yeah. So, but I'll get you a copy early so you can go to Greece with it.
That would be great. Oh my gosh. And then I'd show off too to like all the other writers. I'll be like, look at this. The author Diane Zinna is teaching and doing the workshop, and she's a huge fan of yours. So I'll just make sure she.
So I will get you the copy of the book, but I need you to take me with you.
Yes.
Yeah.
She's like, sure. So let's just go. I will get you the information.
I don't know her, but I know I have encountered Diane Zinna in the.
She's a wonderful, wonderful workshop leader and teacher and writer.
You guys are going to have a great time, but anybody would be like, Greece? And they don't even need to hear Diane Zinna, but like, make sure Diane is a selling point here too.
Diane.
Oh yeah,
she's amazing. She's amazing. That's why that's where I'm going. I'm like, I'm going.
You're like, I would have gone if it was down the street.
Exactly. I was just like, oh, you're doing a workshop? I'm definitely going. And then I was like, oh, it's in Greece. Now I'm really excited about going. Yes. I'm like, I would have gone if it was anywhere. Yeah. Carol,
even
thank
in
you.
The neighborhood you can't get lost in. Sorry.
Carol, thank you so much for being with us today. We loved Return to Wyldcliffe Heights. Oh, I love it so much. Thank you. It gave me all of my gothic love and vibes. I liked the ghost story in it, so like bordered on a little bit of horror. Chef's kiss.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
no one said this the whole episode. We have to at least do at least one. Okay, if we all say it at the same time, maybe something weird will happen. Red Bess.
Red Bess, Red Bess, Red Bess.
Uh-oh.
No,
Uh-oh.
nothing happened. It just means it's time for me to end the show.
Yeah. Like you're trying to summon a ghost. It's time to go.
All right. Thank you,
Thank
so
you,
much for
Carol.
having
Oh, and
me.
everybody
So
stay
much fun.
tuned for September 2nd.
Yes, September 2nd, we have Liz Holden and Mighty Millie Novak, which we rarely ever have YA, but this is a friend of mine, and it's queer roller derby. So
I know, I heard queer roller derby, and I'm like,
no.
yes.
She told me that I couldn't hog her on my own show. I had to share. So she's coming on VOX.
Yes, so we have, and then
Tuesday
2 weeks after that, or maybe a week after that. Oh, 2 weeks after that, we have Johnny Compton with Devil Kills Devil, which we're really excited about.
That's not going to air live. So
That's not going to air live. It's going to air the day its book comes out. But we've got lots of fun stuff happening. We are going to have Josh Malerman back. I know we had to cancel his show a few weeks ago. Stupid COVID. I had to cancel, then he got COVID, and so
and you didn't even see each other. You both independently got COVID.
we independently got COVID
from writing things. I'm sure, like both of you.
Not from writing, I hope, but
not directly from writing. No, I went to NeCon,
yes,
and I was like, well, I'm definitely getting COVID, and I did. But on that note, everybody, thank you for watching live or listening to the replay, and we will see you all soon.